May I extend a very warm welcome to all of you. Now let us start the first session. Uh, the title or the subject of our discussion in this session is Role and Contribution of the Two Countries for the Regional Order. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start the session. And as I said, the subject for discussion during this session is Role and Contribution of the Two Countries for the Regional Order. I am extremely pleased. I am very honored to chair this session. I am pleased because I have been connected with the whole process of Yonsei war of dialogue for the last about 3 years or 4 years. This is the fourth session of the dialogue, and it's a great privilege for us to hold this mega session in New Delhi at War of Office. It's a matter of deep personal honor for chairing this session. This session actually has very distinguished speakers from both Korea and India. There are two Korean speakers. They are Jiyoon Kim, Dr. Jiyoon Kim, and Dr. Paik. And from India, of course, Dr. Jagannath Panda from IDSA is here to make his presentation. In addition, we have two discussants. One retired ambassador, Skand Tyal, who is very knowledgeable about India-Korea relations. And we also have my colleague, Dr. Rajeshwari. She is sitting there. I think her name has not been included in the list, but we have, because we thought that there should be a very balanced kind of representation from ORF, and also if we are going to have one lady speaker from Korea, I think we should also have one lady discussion from India. So that is how we have planned it. So we are really pleased that all of you are here, and we are going to listen to the very valuable views of the speakers from both Korea and India. As Chairman Joshi said in the morning, we are in the midst of witnessing so many crucial changes. We all know incredible changes have taken place on the Korean peninsula. About 3 months ago, nobody would have dreamt that President Trump and Chairman Kim would meet, shake hands, and then compliment each other, and then even sign a joint statement. But that has happened. That's a great, hope for the future. And that is really, if the outcome is going to be very positive, that is going to really change the security and strategic landscape of Northeast Asia. It's also going to have tremendous implications for the rest of Asia also. Opinion, of course, is divided on the merits of the joint statement of Kim and President Trump. But the fact of the matter is whether they are going to quickly achieve any positive results, that of course remains the realm of speculation. But what they have achieved so far is definitely a positive indication in the direction of peace and development, particularly in Northeast Asia, which has been really plagued by decades of tension, hostility, and things of that kind. Therefore, there is a great deal of optimism. Let us hope for the best. And I think, as I said, this is really going to completely change the strategic scenario of Indo-Pacific region. Now, for that, I think one should also acknowledge the wisdom and statesmanship of South Korean president, Mr. Moon, right from the beginning, after assuming charge as the president, he has been really advocating very strongly a policy of reconciliation and dialogue, and that has really given fruits now. Diplomacy has been very effective, and for that, I think South Korean president should be complimented. Many people are now demanding that he should be given Nobel Peace Prize. I think he should be a real one of the running, front running candidates for that prize. That apart, let me come to India-South Korea partnership. How this is really going to affect the partnership, how it is going to have its own effect on the stability and peace of the region. We all know that about 45 years have passed since both these countries started their ambassadorial diplomatic relations. And during these 45 years, they have fashioned a partnership which really encompasses a wide spectrum of subjects like maritime security, nuclear non-proliferation, nuclear disarmament, then economic integration of the region, and things of that kind. They're also working together in a number of regional forums, including, for example, ASEAN Regional Forum, then EAS, East Asian Summit. Then we have got other items also, like, for example, ASEM, for example, and also ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, etc., etc. I think they are interacting in a number of regional as well as global forums. Now, what they've really done is, what exactly they want? I mean, how do they contribute to regional stability, etc., etc. As I said, the partnership actually addresses a number of issues. I don't want to repeat those issues. And secondly, both these countries are also very deeply interested in certain things like, for example, maritime security. Both of them depend upon foreign trade. Foreign trade is the real lifeline of their economic development, and therefore they really want oceans to be free, and they strongly advocate the need for maintaining freedom of navigation in the open seas, etc. Then they also talk about the need for keeping this region free, open, transparent, inclusive, and also rule-based. And the region also should be free from the dominance of any single country. So they are really trying to stress these points, and thereby they contribute to the peace and stability of this region. In fact, South Korea is an important partner in India's Act East policy. In 2010, both India and South Korea, they established their bilateral strategic partnership, and thereby they emphasized the need for working together for peace and prosperity of this region. In 2015, they elevated this partnership to special strategic partnership. At a time when Prime Minister Modi went to South Korea, and that was a turning point. In fact, Modi administration has given a great boost to India-Korea partnership. For example, not only they elevated the strategic partnership to special strategic partnership, they also made summit-level meetings, dialogue, annual summit meetings possible. For example, every year, I think they meet either in Korea or in India or in some other countries on the sidelines of some global or regional forums. Then they also introduced 2+2 meetings at the level of Defense Secretary and also Foreign Secretary. Then Foreign Secretary's dialogue between the two countries also has become an annual fair. And therefore, there are so many other things that have really happened to strengthen the bilateral strategic partnership. Now, in between, they also signed the comprehensive economic partnership agreement in 2011. I think that has also left to a marked increase in India-South Korea bilateral trade. This year, it is very pleasing to see that bilateral trade has almost reached 20 billion US dollars. Earlier, for the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, I think trade was actually declining, but it has again picked up. Similarly, South Korean investment also is on the rise. Now, the total cumulative volume, total volume of South Korean investment in India has almost come to about 5 billion US dollars. You all know names like Hyundai, etc., etc. They're all household names here. Their contribution to automobile field, particularly, is very remarkable, and that is likely to continue in the coming years also. Now, coming to Mr. Moon's policy, for example, he is talking about the need for strengthening South Korea's relations with countries outside the northern partners. Thereby, he means China, Russia, then Japan, USA. And for far too long a time, I think South Korean diplomacy has been centered around these countries. But now he wants to get out of that. He wants to develop and diversify South Korean diplomacy. He wants to build up new bridges with countries like ASEAN group of countries. He made a tour to Indonesia. He had a successful trip to Vietnam, for example, and also he went to the Philippines. And then you find South Korea is getting deeply involved in some of the infrastructure projects in Indonesia, Vietnam, etc., etc. Similarly, is coming to India, and I think that is going to be a very important event as far as India is concerned. So he's most welcome. I think his visit to India is going to be very positive. He is going to really result in a very substantial contribution to the strengthening of our bilateral relations. I think with these words, I think I've already talked enough. I think I'm going to request our distinguished speakers to speak by turns. First, let me have the pleasure of requesting Dr. Ji-yoon Kim to speak for about 15 minutes.
Thank you for the introduction. And I understand this is the place to discuss and talk about President Moon's new southern policy and how India can play a key role in there. And frankly speaking, I feel left out because I'm the person who is supposed to talk about Northeast Asia and the current landscape and geopolitical landscape. But I would like to assure you that President Moon and his government is very much focusing and also pay attention to this region and how important it is to expand South Korea's diplomacy and not just limited to those four countries like China, Japan, United States, and Russia, but it has to go over that. And I was a member of last year, I was a member of the Foreign Ministry Task Force, and then I clearly could feel that that was one of the most important implementation that the President Moon is going forward. But at this point, as we all know, not just the South Korea, not just the Korean Peninsula, not just the Northeast Asia, but whole world is paying attention to what is happening in the region. There was two important summits, and then everybody is trying to analyze why it is so important there and what is going to be the next step of the South Korea and North Korea and the United States, and plus China. I just briefly go over what happened. I mean, you all know that there was a really troubled 2017, and there's 6 nuclear tests by North Korea, and there's 20 missile tests. And since President Moon Jae-in inaugurated, there's 11 missile tests. That was a little bit of disgrace, as people said, to President Moon, because when he visited Berlin and in Germany, he clearly stated that his direction of North Korean policy, which was not directly talking about engagement, but he eventually was going forward engagement with North Korea. He was talking about and demanded the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and North Korea, but at the same time, he made sure that in the Korean Peninsula, the peace should be first to come over. And also that he assured that South Korea is not going to pursue or to try to unify in the first place. And actually, President Moon Jae-in, he mentioned that he is guaranteeing the North Korean regime. That is a really important point because a lot of Korean people and a lot of Korean strategists thought the peace can be only achieved after unification. But at this point, President Moon made clear that peace should be coming in the Korean peninsula first, and then we can talk about unification. So it is more important to restore the relationship and also going forward, sort of restoring the national identity. And then we can talk about the unification. So that was really important, transforming of the understanding of the situation. But still, there was really the turmoil. There were a lot of turmoil in 2017. And as we all know, at the beginning of this year, 2018, North Korea changed their policy, and they actually started a peace approach. And in his statement in New Year's Day, the Kim Jong-un, he said they are going to participate in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. And that was really the landmark speech. And it was President Moon who actually grabbed the opportunity, came over to South Korea. Right after he heard the news and the statement, he welcomed the North Korea's participation. And in the interview with NBC, which is an American broadcasting company, he actually mentioned that we can maybe postpone the joint military drill with the United States. Or to reduce the size of the scale. And that actually was very smart move by the President Moon Jae-in. I mean, some people kind of sent some worrisome notes that, well, isn't it too hasty a decision? But I understand the President Moon's thought, you cannot really pass this chance or opportunity. And he understood that the timeline of North Korea's movement in terms of nuclear development and all the missile tests, and afterwards what their moves were going to be like. So, the rest is actually what you know in the history. So there was the Inter-Korea Summit in April 27th, and the North Korea and the U.S. Summit. After 70 years of hostility, it took place in Singapore in June 12th. I happened to be in Singapore while the summit was going on, and this mood was really, I don't know how to explain. That was a really touching and kind of moving moment for a Korean like me. So I can go over for the Inter-Korea Summit first. So it was the April 27th, and there was a Panmunjom statement. There were three major subjects or three major points. First, restoring inter-Korea relationship, and also restore the ethnic identity. It can be done by the economic cooperation and reunion of separated families and human exchanges through the cultural and the sports events. Well, the President Moon also understands that there is such a gap between the North and the South Korea. It is really interesting point that the South Korea, particularly the South Korean, the young generation, they're losing the connection with the North Korea and North Korean people. I'm actually in charge of public opinion studies at my institute, and I've been doing a lot of the public opinion polls, and it includes the questions like, how do you think about North Korea, and what do you think about reunification, and what do you think about the aid, giving an aid to North Korea? One interesting thing is particularly young generation, those in the 20s, they're becoming more and more hostile and hawkish toward North Korea. It's not just because they are losing the connection, but also they didn't really have any experience, good and positive experience with North Korea for the past 9 years. So it is the first task for the government and for South Korea to restore at least kind of friendly feeling toward each other. Maybe it's a way too early or premature to talk about unification at this point. So the first thing we have to do is restore the feeling, the friendly feeling. So when we, for example, like when we ask, what is North Korea to you? And those who are in the old generation, 60 and over, who are very conservative in the security matters, they still think almost like a 30 and 40% of the old generation who are over the 60 years. They're not actually old at this recently, but they say that this is still one of us. Although I do not really like them, but they are still one of us. So we're brothers. But in the case of young generation, those in their 20s, particularly the males, almost 50% of those males in their 20s think it is an enemy. So this is the situation that South Korea is having now. And so it is pretty premature to talk about unification. The first thing we have to do is restore the relationship by exchanging a lot of people, by exchanging the events and cultural and sports events. And maybe this is the first step that we can do, start at the low level. The reunion of the separate families, it is scheduled August 15th, and without any further events, I think it will be happening pretty soon. And also economic cooperation is a little bit of a delicate, I think it's a sensitive thing, because basically North Korea is under the sanction by the UN and by other countries and also by the United States. So it may take some time. We have to probably wait until there's some sign from the United States, I think. But it is the all-time the goal by the President Moon that restoring and having the economic relations with North Korea and reopening the Kaesong industrial complex. And the second part is easing the military tension between the two Koreas. And now the military talk is going on between the North and the South. And in the Panmunjom statement, they're talking about the easing tension in NLL and transforming into the peace, the maritime peace zone, and to seize the hostile military actions, and also try to recover and discover the remains of those fallen heroes during the Korean War, probably buried in the DMZ area. And the third, the probably most important part, I think, to establish permanent peace regime in the Korean Peninsula. In there, he declared, he promised that to have a declaration at the end of Korean War within a year, and the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Well, in the Panmunjom statement, I think there are two very important messages sent, and the two different audiences, I think. First is going to probably the outside world and also the US and American strategist, which is a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. For a lot of strategists, a lot of experts in foreign policy, it's a very important issue, the denuclearization. But I can say that for a lot of Korean people, for a lot, most of Korean public, declaration of the end of Korean War is much more important. This is, it is the thing that only the Koreans can understand. I mean, the Korean War, although we can say that the Korean War is technically over, but still, that is such a traumatic memory, and definitely it's not the one that you want to inherit to your generation, a future generation. So I understand that after the Panmunjom statement and the Inter-Korea Summit, there's a huge support from the public toward the President Moon's North Korean policy. Over 80% of Koreans sent a support, and they also considered it was a success. And very surprisingly, over 70% of Koreans said that Chairman Kim Jong-un is going to keep the promise, and they trust what he said. So there was really significant first step between the two Koreas, and it has also significant implication, and people have a high hope for the next, for what is going to happen the next time. And then there was North Korea and the US summit, which was a little bit more controversial, I have to say. So you probably have read what has written in the statement. And the first part is establishing new US-DPRK relations for peace and prosperity. And the secondly, jointly building a lasting and stable peace regime in the Korean Peninsula. And then there was the Panmunjom Declaration as in there, the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And then the last part, the recovering POW and MIA remains, including immediate repatriation of those already identified. And I just saw the news that it is already has taken place. Within a few days, there was a report that North Korea is sending at max 200 remains of the fallen heroes of the United States. Some people say that this may be the first step for the normalization of the diplomatic relations between the PRK and the United States. After the North Korea-US summit, there's some interesting polling result. In Korea, the Gallup, they had conducted public opinion polls, and it says 66% of South Koreans, they think the summit was successful. And why, when there was a following question, so why do you think it was successful? And a lot of people, actually most of the people, plurality of the number said that the meeting itself is meaningful. It has been 70 years of hostile relations, and they start to restore and rebuild a new chapter, and that itself is really important. And the 53% respondents of South Korea said that North Korea will follow the agreement, will keep the promises, basically. I mean, it was an amazing number, considering how the South Korean people thought about Kim Jong-un and North Korea. I've been working on the public opinion polls for almost 9 years, and then I know the ups and downs and how people think about North Korea and the U.S. and China. And then even for me, it is a really amazing number that people putting the faith in the Chairman Kim and the North Korea as well. And I also found a really interesting polling result, which was conducted by CNN. And after the summit, 52% of Americans thought, answered that they are satisfied with the Trump's meeting with Kim Jong-un. And 57% of Americans think that North Korea will give up a significant number of nuclear weapons and close down the facilities. I didn't say all the nuclear weapons or all the nuclear facilities. Maybe it is they understand, they're very clever. They understand it's impossible to detect all the nuclear facilities and nuclear weapons and close it down or abolish them. But almost 60% of Americans believe that the promise will be kept. That is a really interesting point, because a lot of experts and some of conservative Korean, the foreign policy experts as well, they actually disagree. I mean, I know they were not really happy, and they are not satisfied with the result, saying that the U.S. given too much, and North Korea is such a winner. And then the President Trump, who bragged about being a negotiator, and they were saying that what's the result of you're the excellent negotiator. I think they are very much focusing on the technicality of the things. I mean, obviously, there was no mention of CVID. There was nothing really that the specifics or details in the statement. But the problem is that it was, sorry, Siri. What did I say? The thing is, there was such a time constraint. I mean, you need a lot of time, at least a year or so, to have really the specifics included statement. It was how many months? Like 3 months after they decide to meet, and then there was some halt. You all know that what happened. So basically, it was impossible actually to have the specifics, I think. And then, as a statement addressed it, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is going to lead the team and keep going the high-level talks with North Korea, and it's just simply the first step, but the significant step. So maybe we are too much paying attention too much on the specifics and details, and we are maybe too hasty and feel like everything has to be done in the one day. Maybe we have to wait for a while to see the real things not get done. But I also think it's a very significant move, and this is actually getting all those in the geopolitical landscape of Northeast Asia to be changed or transformed. So at this point, we can talk about what's going to be the next. The President Trump actually can offer some of the things without the consent of Congress under the American politics. He can lift some of the sanctions. There's a UN Security Council sanctions, but also there's the sanctions done by only the United States. And therefore, as far as I remember, there's a 4 sanctions. The 2 are now the public laws, which means that it has passed the Congress, it became a law. Another 2 is done by executive order, which means that the Trump president, as a president, simply can overturn it. So some part of the sanctions can be lifted. Of course, he's not going to use it at this point, I think, without further action taken by North Korea. And also, he can declare the ending of the Korean War. This is a political rhetoric, a political statement. It doesn't really have any, it is not really legally binding. So he can just say it. Of course, a lot of people will consider it as a significant movement, a significant first move, but without much of the damaging his political capital, I think he can also do it. And the normalization of diplomatic relations, that's probably coming to the later part of the talk and negotiation. And the halting the joint military exercise, that is already done, which was a surprise. And I know that a lot of those experts who are not really happy with the agreement are also infuriated by his announcement, which came up in the press conference. But when he really wants to complete all the process, he definitely needs a Congress, the consent of Congress. If there's any type of treaty or the congressional executive agreement, he needs to go through the Congress. Either he needs the 2/3 of the Senate content, or he has to have a majority in the both houses. And that's the question, how much or how likely the Congress is going to pass the bill or approve the treaty. That will be the most significant and very important question for the future in the US side. From the South Korean side, well, we have to remember that the President Moon has a North Korean policy has always been these, actually the 5, I just restricted to 4. First, a permanent peace regime in the Korean peninsula, and then the complete denuclearization, guaranteeing the North Korean regime, and the new economic map of Korean peninsula and the non-political exchanges between 2 Koreas. The first 2 is ongoing, and we're still working on that. And the 4th one, the non-political exchanges, like human exchanges and events and everything, I think it is already done. Some part is already done, and it's also an important one. But it has a kind of low level of a bar. The most important thing, actually, is a new economic map of Korean peninsula. What the President Moon and this government is kind of planning is having the market, one market of the Korea. Because besides the social, the national identity or ethnic identity, also what is important is you have to pull the North Korean economy to a certain level to talk about unification. So it is very important to give in economic aid, and also from the North Korean side, it is very important to have economic development and the growth continuously. So, and then the plan the Moon government has is some kind of like in the EU style, EU type of the economic cooperation and economic community should be first created, and then within the framework we can let and or make North Korea develop its economy and also restore the relationship and eventually the national identity. That was I think, the big picture that President Moon has. So we are moving into that direction, and I think that this is a very symbolic and also significant step toward this big plan of the Moon government. And what is really important here is we have to stabilize and improve the North and South relations first. And that is only one way that we can have more diplomatic space and room to maneuver, not really restrained in those big four countries' diplomatic relations, so that we can go over that political area, but go over to the Southeast Asia and India, of course, so accomplished that new southern policy. I was going to talk about in China just a little bit, but maybe I can just defer to Professor Paik. Okay.
Very brief statement.
Very briefly, because this is a country that we can really pass by, and North Korea definitely is trying to restore the relation with China, and also wants to have it as sort of an insurance that when they are dealing with the United States and also the South Korea. You probably have heard the news that Kim Jong-un is visiting China right now. It's third time already within 3 months, I think. Well, the halting joint military exercise between the ROK and the US are definitely the gift not just to North Korea, but also China. It's almost like, it reminds me of what China was asserting, that stopping and the nuclear and the missile tests, and at the same time, the stopping and the joint military drills of the ROK in the US. And a lot of people, and including myself, projected that no matter what the result of the US and North Korea summit, China is going to try to engage with North Korea more proactively, very different from the previous years. And then, as we all know that now China is trying to show up how strong the bondage is with North Korea, with them, like renting the airplane to the Kim Jong-un. And I visited China like a month ago, and then I could feel that they really, really want to be in the part of this peace process. Particularly, they very much pay attention to whether or not they are included in the declaration of the ending the war as a member, and also the possible peace treaty. At this point, I think China is, well, maybe we can give in the declaration of ending the Korean War, but definitely they are going to get in the peace treaty when there is a talk and discussion about that. And they even say that they are entitled to participate, because they are legally, they have to be there. They were the part, they were actually the member who signed the armistice. The truth is not, they're legally not binding, but anyway, so this is the country now. This is the changing landscape, the North Asia, and China definitely would like to have take a lead in this changing the situation. I'll stop here. I'm sorry to going over. Sorry.
An excellent presentation. Dr. Kim has given us very rare insights into the Korean situation as we see it today. She has touched on some of the most important points, like, for example, whether it's going to be engagement or whether it's going to be unification. I think that question is very, very important. And also she talked about the need for easing the tensions on the subcontinent, on the peninsula, sorry. Also need for restoring peace with Korean peninsula. Then she talked about North Korea-US summit, the role of US Congress, etc. And also public opinions in Korea as well as in America. I don't know about Japan. I wish she had touched on the public opinion stuff in Japan, for example, how the Japanese really reacted to the summit and how they keep on talking about the need for being tough, being, the need for maintaining, very, very kind of maximum pressure on North Korea, etc. So I think with that you can answer at the time of, question and answer session. Then she also talked about the situation within South Korea. I think we are really, I feel personally very enlightened after listening to her presentation. Now let me turn my attention to the next speaker, Dr. Paik, who is a very distinguished scholar. I think I have heard him once on India-Japan relations. That was also an excellent presentation.
Thank you so much.
That's really good.
Thanks a lot, for introducing me. And following up, Dr. Kim Ji-yoon Kim's the presentation, I will talk about South Korea's new Southern policy and India's activist policy. I think it's a toward more comprehensive cooperation might be possible, and try to overview the bilateral relationship. And I want to start with my presentation is how much do we actually know and understand each other? Last 3-4 years, and then I've been working on China, India, South Korea, and then Japan and the United States. Those are in relationship, especially bilateral relationship between India and South Korea. And what I found is we really do not know each other and understand each other. So let me just go over some other issues here and there. But at the same time, the politics and economy and society and this public diplomacy dialogue is going to cover many issues between these two countries. But we have to be a little bit more specific on the issues, and I will raise some questions about it. And then more interactions at every level. I think it's everyone involved in this type of dialogue. In the government as well as policy community and academia, but many want it. But I think it hasn't been realized until now. 2017, 2018. Do we see any the significant improvement? Yes, we do. But I think it's President Moon Jae is coming to visit, and have a summit with Prime Minister Modi. But still, long way to go. And I will briefly talk about these two leaders' proactive policy drives toward each other. President Moon Jae-in's New Southern policy, in Korean 신남방 정책, and then Modi's activist policy. Strategic partnership between South Korea and India. Why do these two countries need each other more and more in these last 10 years? Many people talk about it, and then that actually start with domestic political regions. South Korea really need more growth and then more equality. And at the same time, India, the BJP's nationwide preeminence become really clear these days. And then lightest and then pro growth and market, economic policies, even labeled as developmental state. It promotes this India to go further and go beyond the subcontinent. International politics, it's even more complicated. South Korea actually. Of course, in 2018, we have a rapprochement in the Korean Peninsula and Northeast Asia, but the U.S., Japan versus China and North Korea, South Korea was stuck in there. At the same time, we suffered from the China's de facto economic sanction or Saudi issue. Of course, it's become very, very controversial. But South Korea's economic over dependence on China has become really serious, and then South Korea's think about China plus one policy, need more production site and then market. At the same time, the Moon Jae-in government and then overall, policy community think that South Korea really need to go beyond the Northeast Asia. What about India, China? Yes, China. Whenever I have a dialogue with Indian counterparts, and then China has become is number one and then the most mentioned in the name. But at the same time, what I find in the last few years on the Modi's activist policy, India really want to go for the global great power status, beyond in the subcontinent. So it's actually there are these interactions between domestic politics and international politics actually make these two countries have a better and then more relationship. But the thing is, the Dr. Kim Ji-yoon Kim explained and analyzed in the very detail. I agree with most of the part, and this is the very important for the South Korea and the India relationship too. It is because this type of rapprochement, proactive drive and other factors, to make this type of rapprochement and then better relationship in a peace process in Northeast Asia, it's go beyond Northeast Asia. It's actually tightly connected to across Asia, especially when we talk about Indo-Pacific strategy and then China's OBOR strategy. And then it's we need to think about this type of better. I mean the more significant and fundamental the dynamics in the security picture. I will briefly talk about South Korean understanding of Modi's activist policy towards South Korea. It is because, to be honest with you, Prime Minister Modi's activist policy is not very well known in South Korea. This is a fact, unfortunately. But as far as I know, the South Korean government and policy community have this type of general understanding of activist policy. So, South Korea, Prime Minister Modi, activist policy, South Korea, they regard as South Korea as a active activist policy's newest partner in Northeast Asia. Indo-China relationship very, very complicated, but and the earlier established India-Japan relationship a lot deeper than India-South Korea relationship. So South Korea-India relationship is relatively new and but very significant for the both country. South Korea is an important activist policy subject whose economic as well as political interests are largely converge with those of India. But many people, I will briefly talk about the comparison with the bilateral with India's bilateral relationship with Japan and then South Korea. But I think it's South Korea's importance is emerging. Prime Minister Modi actually pointed out that the Republic of Korea, South Korea, is extremely important for India's activist policy and Make in India initiative. Only one thing I want to add on is it is not just one economic, say manufacturing or some other factors. It's in each and every sector, including security-related sectors such as defense and civil nuclear development and aerospace industries become more and more comprehensive. But the thing is, the political security is another issue. South Korea as a security partner across Asia, South Korean people are really wondering, whether Modi's activist policy towards South Korea include this part too. South Korea is, of course, want to go beyond this, Northeast Asia, but we are a little bit hesitant, to go beyond Northeast Asia in political security dimension due to many regions. And then, what about the comparison between India, South Korea, India, Japan partnership? Probably we need to think about some other factors like China for the South Korea security. Many initiatives, and then you can read all those initiatives and regional security forums such as ASEAN, ADMM, plus 8, and then ARF, many other cooperation. But the important thing is more conventional security cooperation in security crisis for each other is really possible. We are not going to overstretch our state capacity to too much, but we can think about this issue too. And South Korea's response to activist policy, it's very hard for us to think about the South Korea's response to activist policy because there are very, very little and very, very few, to be honest with you. Say, South Korea-India relation is, say, in many aspects, less than, India-Japan relation. Many the government, the highest level of the annual summit, and the meetings between these two countries. But South Korea and India, there are very few. But we are making progress though. Another thing, another factor is North Korea. South Korea, Indian scholars and then policy community, analysts and government decision makers, and really think about and consider this dilemma for the South Korea and then Asian level interaction, especially in political security. And then we are actually have a little bit different view, probably perspective on the expanding China too. It is because North Korea is there, for South Korea. And then what we really think is in the near future is a rapprochement in Korean Peninsula's impact on Modi's activist policy. Again, this type of change of security structure in Northeast Asia actually tightly related to Indo-China, Indo-Pacific strategy and OBOR strategy too. So we should think about that dimension too. China factor. When we talk about bilateral relationship, China plays a large role, a very significant role, for South Korea's understanding and then response to the India's activist policy. As we know, and China has significant economic and political influence over South Korea. And then very important and better and a safer relationship between the two Koreas, as Dr. Kim explained extremely well. Based upon my dialogue in a conversation with the China expert in China, and they actually are a little bit worried about South Korea's closure in political military ties with India. Yeah, was a big deal, but we can think about it. And then a lot of Japan comparison going on too. So Moon Jae-in's Northeast Asia plus policy, and based upon our understanding of this background between the bilateral relations, these two countries, and Northeast Asia plus Responsible Community Initiative is coined by and then implemented by the Moon Jae-in government. To be honest with you, this particular government, Moon Jae-in government, tried to formulate. It's not done deal. It's completely in a plan, but they are actually formulating this very, very ambitious initiative, for South Korea's foreign policy. That includes India. Acknowledging, the importance of four powerful neighbors. At the same time, the South Korea really need to go beyond Northeast Asia for having more political, economic opportunities and advantages and leverage toward these two countries. And there are three parts, and then the southern policy towards India and ASEAN. New southern policy actually particularly important because the previous South Korean government rarely recognized the importance of these two international partners explicitly. Of course, previous government regards India and then ASEAN and then the other southern countries are very important, but this particular government actually made it very clear that okay, India is the next big deal for South Korea. And two pillars, ASEAN and India. India and South Korean government include other South Asian countries too. ASEAN is covering Southeast Asia, but at the same time, we actually try to understand, and then have a better relationship with Southeast Asia, South Asian, countries. But again, we are still, formulating the details. Many comparisons, but we can talk about it. And I think we are on the severe time pressure, so let me just skip this part. And then what I really want to emphasize is this. It's Moon Jae-in government's new southern policy toward India is still evolving. So we really need more inputs from India, very active and proactive, inputs from India too. So my question is, how can these two countries make a big jump in their bilateral and the multilateral relations next 5 to 10 years? Many people talked about it, but never realized. So how can we realize this type of better and then stronger relationship? I think that public diplomacy is very important. This Moon Jae-in government, so I would like to introduce some of Moon Jae-in government, the foreign policy toward Northeast Asia and India and some other things, some other partners. Northeast Asian security, peace. I think Dr. Kim explained extremely well. On North Korea too, no more nuke, conventional provocation, no intention to change regime, sanction negotiation together in 2017 and 2018. I think these two things are going together right now too. But this after Pyeongchang Winter Olympic in February 2018, we are watching, witnessing this proactive approach in Northeast Asia, North Korea. On India, we have the Moon Jae-in government have four principles, to have better relationship: people, prosperity, and then peace at the same time. Plus, we actually focusing on this fourth industrial revolution, and then these two countries have more possibility to go beyond the conventional manufacturing industry as cooperation. So South Korea, let me wrap up. South Korea-India strategic partnership, political economic partnership, as you say, so we are very complementing each other. And the political security partnership, but we really need to figure it out and understand each other's strategic position in subcontinent and then Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia and then some other places. But no overstretch. We are not gonna exaggerate the possibility and the potential of this bilateral relationship too much. That's not gonna help us to move forward. Mutual understanding is extremely important. So I think this venue in this public diplomacy dialogue is very, very important. I think we need to push more, put more effort and resources to doing this. And then finally, we can think about this amalgamation between the Moon's new southern policy and the Modi's active policy in coming years. Okay, and then we are watching, the Japan and the India's relationship extremely good. I think South Korea and then the Indian relationship will be just like that in coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Park. So that's a wonderful presentation. You have made a very detailed presentation of South Korea's policies, South Korea's economic cooperation policies, etc., etc. And your comparison between Japan and South Korea is also very well taken. I think I would like to listen to you, Bo, about that aspect, maybe in greater details. Now, I think now I'll pass on to the third speaker, Dr. Jagannath Panda.
At the outset, let me thank Yonsei University, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Korean government, my good friend Paik, and also WRF Chairman Joshi, Chair Professor Kesavan, and other friends in WRF. Thank you for this opportunity. And it's great to be here at a time when the whole world, including India, is really talking about the Korean Peninsula. I have been asked to talk about actually how India and Korea can actually cooperate in the context of Indo-Pacific. And taking it forward from both the speakers, Dr. Paik and Ms. Kim, what they said, that yes, this relationship has a lot of scope and we need to really figure it out, how to push it forward. I do work on China, and one of the things, and also I partly cover East Asia, including Japan and South Korea, and the Korean issues particularly. One of the things what I have observed in India, as Dr. Paik rightly pointed out, is that we have been really banking on our success on the Arctic policy, and we have been talking about Indian foreign policy on a great deal that Arctic policy of India has been really successful. But come to think about it, if we try to analyze clinically all the three key relationships that we are having today, including our relationship with China, Japan, and South Korea, none of these relationships really give us the kind of confidence we should have in the Indo-Pacific regions. If we take into the trade and economic cooperation, if we talk about the political cooperation, in each of these relationships, actually, there is a huge scope and tremendous opportunities are there to evolve. As Dr. Paik pointed out, that in India, we have been really obsessed more about China. And partly also we have nurtured the India-Japan relationship to the extent of thinking that this is one meritorious relationship that actually can be promoted on the context of how to manage China or China's influence in the regions. We haven't really realized that there is one critical actor in East Asia and Northeast Asia, that is South Korea, which can be really a good global stable partner for India in the years to come. And therefore, my argument here in this speech would be that, of course, I would at the outset like to compliment all the our former ambassadors and the current ambassadors who are here, present here, from both the sides, who have nurtured and invested in this relationship to a great deal in last 2 decades or so. And as a result, we have a strategic and special partnership with South Korea today. And my compliments to them. But again, as I mentioned, that this relationship has been really constrained mostly at a bilateral level. If we look at the two decades trajectory, there have been new Asia policy initiatives from South Korea. There has been Sunshine Policy. There has been now NAPSI initiative under the previous President Park. And now under President Moon Jae-in, we have a Northeast Asia Plus Community Foreign Policy. In all of this foreign policy, if we try to say, India has been actually factored as an important actor. But somehow we have not really nurtured this relationship between India and South Korea beyond the bilateral level. So one of my key arguments in this speech is that the time has come, we need to really provide a context and a contour to this relationship to move it forward to a regional and to a global level. And therefore, I think we have to, if we are really talking about India-South Korea cooperation and the Indo-Pacific region, we need to really talk about the issues which are beyond the bilateral level. Saying that, I think we cannot really nurture this relationship to a regional and global level if we try to overlook the bilateral issues. And therefore, the key would be to maximize and improve the bilateral ties as much as the regional and global ties. And I think if we talk about the Indo-Pacific regions, we have to really build a context to this relationship, that in what context India-South Korea relationship can be built from here on at a regional and global level. And for that, I think both the speakers have rightly mentioned that we need to really take into account the new developments, the new historic developments and contexts that are emerging. And we need to really factor it out how India and South Korea can cooperate in the Indo-Pacific region. Of course, one of the historic development that has happened is the Inter-Korean Summit of 27th April 2018. And in that summit, if we see the declaration which has been released, that is Panmunjom Declaration. Of course, India does not really figure in that declaration. That declaration is mostly about two Koreas and about the Northeast Asian regions. But then a critical review of that declaration, and if you see that each and every wordings of that declaration, and I think India's spirits and sentiments is aptly reflected in that declaration. And therefore, I think both the strategic community from both the sides need to really factor India-South Korea relationship in the context of the new emerging scenario that is happening after the Inter-Korean Summit in the Panmunjom village. Now, if you see that declaration, there have been emphasis on peace, prosperity. There have been peace about the unification. There have been emphasis about how the two Koreans should promote dialogues and they should talk about integrations. And all of these issues have actually India has been advocating for last 6 to 7 decades, right from the Korean War days. And therefore, India has not really been overlooked in some context. India's spirits and emotions have been really factored in the declaration, even though there is no mention about India. Second is, I think, the Trump and Kim summit, which happened in the 12th June 2018. I think we do not really need to see this summit in purely US-North Korea bilateral context. I think this summit was one of the most important ever summit in last 1 decade in some ways. And I think it is going to change the Asia's strategic and military balance of relationship. And in that context, I think if we try to position India and South Korea relationship, and I think there is one country, South Korea, which is there in the Northeast Asia, and here India is located in South Asia. And we are actually building a bridge between the two extremes of the Indo-Pacific regions or the Asia-Pacific regions, if we prefer to use the old word. And this summit between Kim and Trump has actually encouraged all the countries in the world to think about how to reach to the Korean peninsula, North Korea particularly, more intently than earlier. As a result, you could see that a number of countries have invited today Kim Jong-un to visit them. And I think India would not really be sitting idle in this regard. I think we have already sent our Minister of Foreign Affairs for State earlier, and I think there is active diplomacy currently is in pursuit to reach to both the Koreas. And I think the South Korean president's visit to India next month is going to provide a context to this India and Northeast Asia engagement in a futuristic sense. Third is that I think we also need to take the developments which is happening in the Indo-Pacific regions, which are not really directly linked to India-Korea relationship, but it is going to in some ways influence and affect India-Korea relationship. One is the emergence of Xi Jinping and the removal of the presidency limit in China. That is a key development because we'll be seeing that Xi Jinping, the president of China, will be there in power for a long time. And that has implications not only for India and South Korea, but for the entire regions. But from where we do see, I think the message for India-South Korea relationship is very significant here because under Xi Jinping, the China's flagship project, Belt and Road Initiative, is now moved to the second stage. If we see Xi Jinping's first tenure as the first phase of Belt and Road initiatives. Now he's in the second tenure. That should be considered as the second stage of Belt and Road initiative. In the first 10 years, Xi Jinping successfully campaigned a lot about Belt and Road Initiative. In the second tenure, he is going to execute it. And therefore, it has tremendous implications for India and South Korea because we are the two top 15 ranked GDP ranked economy in the world. It is going to affect to some extent South Korean investment in Asia and in the world. And also India is anyway affected in terms of connectivity and other security issues. There are other issues if we take into account the American approach to Asia and American approach to both Korea and India. Of course, South Korea is an alliance partner of the US. But again, I think the time has come, what both the speakers pointed out, and in the morning session we discussed, I think South Korea also looking for new stable global partners currently, both in Asia and outside Asia. And therefore, India is an ideal country to be a partner. And I think Moon Jae-in's foreign policy is really factoring India much more highly than the previous government. In context of India, if you see, Trump has actually in some ways neglected India. India has not really been reciprocated the way India should be reciprocated. So if we take all of this thing into account, including the development in Japan, I think there is a fresh opportunity between India and South Korea to cooperate. My previous speakers have already talked about the new Southern Policy Initiative of South Korea. Now, if we see that foreign policy, I think for the first time explicitly, South Korean government is factoring ASEAN and India are the two important components of South Korea's foreign policy. And this draws a lot of parallel to Taiwan's foreign policy. Taiwan's foreign policy today is actually focused on new southbound foreign policy. It also equally focuses on ASEAN and India. So there is a lot of Indo-Pacific convergence is possible between India and South Korea if we try to capitalize on the countries which is actually complementing our foreign policy. And in that context, I think if we see that India and South Korea are the two extreme poles of Indo-Pacific regions, Taiwan can be a bridging region in this context. Now, we need to also in India, we need to understand that why actually Moon Jae-in has actually factored India as a key country in its foreign policy. Of course, the aim is to revive the South Korean economy, to invest in India and to board India as an economic partner. But in a larger context, I think South Korea is trying to make a global statement through Moon Jae-in's peaceful foreign policy. And what we are seeing his Northeast Asia Plus foreign policy is that it is talking about peace, stability, economic diplomacy, and strategic convergence. And all of these things has been the key arc of Modi's foreign policy, as Professor Paik pointed out. And India's approach has also been very complementary to Moon's approach of foreign policy, both in, if we try to see India's historical approach and today's approach, and I think we have maintained a equicordial relationship with both the Koreas, but we have identified South Korea as our special partner. But the key point, the moot point here is that what India and South Korea can actually cooperate in context of Indo-Pacific, in context of Asia and outside. There are a lot of areas where both of countries can cooperate actually, but one of the key issues, what both the countries should try to actually discuss and try to identify is that how to reform the global financial institutions, global political institutions, and also try to have a robust understanding on maritime security issues, on the soft security issues, including on how to balance their relationship with major powers and big powers. And in this context, I think I'll raise one important point, which is the United Nations Security Council reforms. And I think for India, this is an opportunity time to rethink on our approach about how to really campaign more effectively about becoming a permanent member in the United Nations Security Council. We have a G4 proposal, but I think time has come to review that, and probably time has come to position our relationship with South Korea in a greater context for the United Nations Security Council permanent membership. And I think this also, in some ways, complements Moon Jae-in's foreign policy, because Moon Jae-in's foreign policy is really talking about peace and prosperity in the regions. And there are no better representation can be from Asia if India and South Korea can have a convergence on the issue, particularly on the United Nations Security Council permanent membership issue. There are a lot of other issues regionally we could actually cooperate. One is the AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And both India and South Korea need to really talk about this issue, whether we can really have a converging hand between both the countries in multilateral institutions, in multilateral banks. That is key. That is key for the financial backup and capital investment. APEC is another multilateral institutions where both the countries can actually support each other. South Korea is a member of APEC, and India needs South Korea's support because we have been trying for APEC membership for last 2 decades. We have not really been successful, even though there are rhetorical support have been offered by US. We have not really made it to APEC. So there South Korea can play a role. As Dr. Paik pointed out, both in the context of ASEAN and also RCEP, India and South Korea can cooperate. There are a lot of global financial institutions, WTO, IMF, and World Bank. Both countries can cooperate, particularly when both the countries are talking about reforming these financial institutions. My last point is that how to really capitalize this Indo-Pacific construct of India and South Korea. And I think any capitalization in the Indo-Pacific region has to be done first at the bilateral level. A stable bilateral relationship has to be built between India and South Korea, and therefore we need to really identify critical areas where both the countries can cooperate. Culture, tourism, and educational promotion is one. I will borrow the point again from Dr. Paik that public diplomacy has to be the arc of this cooperation. Critical areas are there where we could cooperate: cyber security, defense technologies, interregional cooperation, maritime governance, climate change, green economy, and marine economy. Officially and non-officially, we need to really put it forward between both the countries. 2+2 dialogue, parliamentary exchanges, highest official level dialogue has to be promoted. Again, I conclude by saying that this relationship is definitely a special and strategic partnership, but we need to provide a context and a contour to this relationship in order to make it really become a Indo-Pacific relationship. There have been initiatives, Sunshine Policy, New Asia initiatives, NAPSI, but Moon Jae-in's foreign policy, which is based on Northeast Asia Plus community, figures India much more prominently, and we need to really capitalize on that in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Panda, for a very excellent presentation. We are really running short of time, and we have got two discussions here. Now, may I request Ambassador Tyal to make a presentation of about 10 minutes?
Thank you, Chair. First, my compliments to the three speakers for very informative and very pitchy presentations on three different aspects of our relationship in the regional context as well as the bilateral context. Of course, all of us are watching very carefully what is happening on the Korean Peninsula, and Dr. Kim made a very analytical presentation what has led to where the peninsula is right now and where it is headed. But if we look at it from a perspective of India and other countries of the region, of course, what is happening in Korean Peninsula is very good. All of us support that. But if a corollary of that is a drawdown of US forces in Korean Peninsula, of course, the exercises have already been curtailed drastically. What would be the implications for safety and security of Asia-Pacific region? Does it mean some kind of a retreat of United States in foreseeable future from the Korean Peninsula from a security point of view? That will have implications. I wonder what is happening to the wartime control of the ROK's army, because still perhaps it is with the United States, and President Moon had declared that during his tenure he'll try to bring it back to Korea, and that will have implications. What are the implications for Japan? If President Trump is transactional in his approach, is it fair to assume that he can ever put New York at stake to save Tokyo? Is the extended nuclear deterrence already a dead concept as far as Japan is concerned? And what happens in that direction? Now, putting it in a context of India's foreign policy, a multipolar Indo-Pacific and a multipolar East Asia is one of the cardinal objectives of India's foreign policy. Now, if we look at it in the context of a retreating United States, whether it happens or not, expanding China, etc., whatever are the security implications for Indo-Pacific or East Asia, one can talk about balance of power approach or cooperative security approach. Of course, we want cooperative security approach. Our Prime Minister has been to China for informal summit, this, that, and the other. But I think all the countries have some kind of a hedging strategy. And in that context, which countries can be other poles in East Asia? Of course, South Korea is a major pole on economy. Japan is a major pole as far as economic power is concerned. India is a pole. We have large population. We are also a nuclear power. But one of the other attributes of power is, of course, permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Dr. Jagannath Panda alluded to it. In fact, Ambassador Shin and Ambassador Park also mentioned that how to win the hearts and minds of people of India. I don't know about 1.3 billion people, but if South Korea could find some ways to endorse India's candidature for permanent membership of Security Council, it will definitely win the heart and minds of people who are in this room. And what I always feel, it is very compatible. What your objective is to have a larger number of members in the non-permanent category is very compatible with whatever India is saying. So there is room to work in this direction and to cement our special strategic partnership. Now, in this context also, Professor Paik had mentioned that Act East policy is not very well known in Korea. There are a lot of attributes to that, and a lot of work is going on. But one of the major component is connectivity. Connectivity of India and India's northeast with ASEAN and further right down up to Far East. And there is a proposal of a trilateral highway. India connecting Myanmar and then Thailand. And there's still a lot of work is to be done in Myanmar because there are gaps in bridges, and it is perhaps beyond the financial and technical capacity of Myanmar to build those bridges and tunnels. And there I see a lot of scope of cooperation between India and Republic of Korea to work together to promote India's Act East policy, and you have a bilateral assistance program with Myanmar. So there is a possibility to work there. Now, Professor Paik also raised this issue of India's closer relationship with Japan as compared to Republic of Korea. There are reasons. Of course, they have a very large assistance program for India. They have very large commitment to develop India's infrastructure. And perhaps there is need to have a very flagship project from Korea, assisted by Korea now that we have a $1 billion fund for assistance, which can have a lot of visibility in India and make people of India more aware. 10 billion is total, 1 billion is assistance, 9 billion is Exim Bank. So 1 billion is there to be used for like upgradation of an IIT or whatever, something which can really be very visible and can have a lot of publicity, public diplomacy. That would be very good. Now, yes, many of us who have been following India-Korea relations and wish it very well are not very happy because there seems to be still sort of work in progress. Things have not happened or they have not gone so far, and I'm sure Ambassador Vishnu Prakash will agree with me on this. But still the core of the relationship is economic, unfortunately. Because on our core relations, whether it is a permanent membership of the Security Council or relations or issues regarding Pakistan, South Korea is very hesitant to speak in support of India. Where our statements, both in 2015 and in statements with Japan, with the United States, have named North Korea time and again on issues related to security, etc., there and their proliferation. But South Korea has been very hesitant in directly or indirectly telling the world that yes, they are with India, when the whole genesis of terrorism in this region and in this world is from Paik region and ultimately from Pakistan. So that is where there are gaps. There are gaps in our perceptions. Towards Japan, there are gaps, and very, very major gaps. So, okay. All right. So I think I'll stop here and just say that India, Korea, Japan, there is some kind of a trilateral track too that needs to be strengthened. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think the job has been somewhat made easier because I think we had three fascinating presentations, quite analytical, looking at the major developments in the region, both in the regional context and the bilateral relations. So a couple of things I just want to, something that didn't come up very explicitly, I want to talk about. One is, of course, the role of Russia and China in this whole game, in a sense, because traditionally North Korea has looked at these two countries as the source of support, and therefore now, if North Korea is to develop greater relationship with the wider world, especially the US, how China and Russia are going to be reacting to these developments. I think that's something that could be maybe talked about during the discussion. I think that's first point I want to talk about. Second question, of course, we need to, there's a greater danger if the North Korean issue, nuclear issue is not resolved. We have come a long way with the two summits that happened and so on and so forth. So whatever format that we are looking at, whether it's a regional format, the six-party format, or the bilateral kind of engagement between US and North Korea, there has to be some kind of a resolution. But I think there is also, so we need to channel our efforts and resources towards that. But that also leaves, brings about some new questions. What kind of a settlement are we looking at? Does this leave, for instance, does the US will get into a deal with the North Korea, leaving aside some of the regional concerns, particularly of South Korea, South Korea and Japan? Because if, for instance, if the arrangement or the agreement between the US and North Korea is going to be focusing much more on the longer reach, long range ICBMs, then what about the regional threats to South Korea possibly and Japan in particular? I think that's something that, again, will keep coming up in a sense. Third point I want to talk about is the South Korea-Japan relations that have remained, that have improved over the years, even though there has been the historical aspect that has always kept the relations at an arm's length, in a sense. But should the US reach an agreement with Kim Jong-un in finding a solution which is somewhat more acceptable to the US, but not necessarily to the regional partners and alliance, would that raise more concerns? Would they? Because I think this whole question also comes in the backdrop of what Ambassador Tyal also talked about. The question comes because of the lack of credibility of the US extended deterrence. So are the US security guarantees sufficient enough to keep the South Koreans and the Japanese satisfied about whatever arrangement that might happen between between North Korea and US, in a sense. And I'm going to stop there, but I think there are one or two more points I just want to bring out from the presentation, directly from the presentation. One is Dr. Kim talked about the unification, as a peace can be established only after unification. But my question is there a sort of clarity between the different parties in terms of what the unification means? Does the North Korean side and the South Korean, do they have the same understanding, and sort of, is there a clarity, or is it a step in process? Maybe many more meetings will happen before you have a sense of how the two sides perceive the unification issue. Second, you talked about the polling results, and that's an important, interesting aspect to understand the sensitivity within South Korea. So you said almost 60% of the Americans believe that Kim Jong-un will keep his promise, keep his word, and work on getting rid of some of the nuclear weapons and so on and so forth. So these 60% of Americans, are they Americans based in the US or in South Korea? So maybe again, Japan would be an important aspect to look at, because you did see some war of words between the Japanese defense minister and the South Korean defense minister at the Shangri-La dialogue recently, because Japan still believes in maximum pressure and so on and so forth. So sort of, how does that Japan angle play out? To both Dr. Paik and Dr. Panda, again, good presentations looking at the India-South Korea relations. The question is, both the presenters, Dr. Paik, in fact, also brought out in very clear what are the potential, the huge potential in the relationship, whether it is political and security and economic. But what are the impediments, in a sense, that you see in realizing this huge potential? Is China the big factor? And China's worries, you talked about it, but you did raise it there, but you didn't give a conclusive answer about it. China's worries on South Korea's growing closer political and security relations. Is that a factor that for South Korea to kind of expanding the possibilities in India-South Korea relationship? And just to add to some of the points that you already talked about, the different set of areas that the two can collaborate. One of the areas that I would think is defense electronics, because I think India is increasingly looking at non-Chinese sourced defense electronics. And I think here is a sector that some of the high-tech countries like South Korea, Taiwan have an opportunity to, of course, but you can expand that. For particular, I think the defense electronics is one area I would think there's a huge potential for too. And outer space, again, I believe South Korea is in the process of, has been reaching out to India, but it hasn't figured very prominently as yet in materializing in solid concrete terms. So these are the areas that I thought could be included and talked about. Great presentation, and enjoyed discussing. Thank you.
Yeah, very quick questions. Ashok Sajanha, former ambassador. My question is to Madam Yeal. You've spoken about the southern policy, and also I think Professor Paik. Would South Korea have any thinking about becoming associated with the Quad in some way or the other? Form Quad, yes, the four countries. You know, the informal at official level, there have been discussions. So, you know, when you're coming to the South, meaning would there be sort of, you know, some interest in getting associated formally or informally? Related question is, you know, what was mentioned that if there is denuclearization and removal of US forces from South Korea, maybe further on leading also from Japan, does South Korea feel that Chinese influence, power, dominance increases, and that is seen as some sort of a threat as far as South Korea is concerned? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do it briefly. I'm glad the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs is here. Talking of China, China initially felt that they're getting isolated and marginalized because the limelight was on KJU, Moon, and Trump. What I want to know from the Koreans is, what is your view regarding China's role and future influence on the Korean Peninsula with reference to, one, the denuclearization, and number two, this peace and security you're all talking about? Because the demand of KJU regarding no military exercises has been met by Trump. It's not an offer. You say it's an offer. No. Trump clearly said no more exercises. And related to this is This lifting of sanctions, again, you said offer. There is no talk of economic sanctions. What I want to know is, you lift half the economic sanctions. Do you think KJU is going to lift half of denuclearization? I mean, what is the way it's going to go? He's not going to give you denuclearization unless you lift those economic sanctions. Thank you, Chair.
Role did China play, in your view, in bringing about the thaw and persuading Kim Jong-un to agree to the meetings with President Moon or President Trump? In other words, what kind of a role? Some say that they played a very quiet, powerful role. Some say that they tried to catch up with what was happening. So that's it.
Questions? How many?
You can answer
Okay.
one question, others can also
Okay.
answer.
I'll probably have two or three. So U.S. forces in the Korean Peninsula. I would say this is elephant in the room. Nobody's talking about right now, but everybody knows that it's going to be on topic at some point. One thing that I can make clear is South Korean public, and I believe that our government as well, is not really thinking about the withdrawal of the U.S. forces in the Korean Peninsula at this point. And as I said, I'm doing a lot of the public opinion polls, and all the time, the people's support for the U.S., the alliance between the ROK and the U.S., and also the presence of U.S. military in the Korean Peninsula was over 80% of support. So we understand that it's not just about North Korea, and then this is kind of related to the regional security, particularly vis-a-vis the China. Everybody understand that, and also joint military drills is not just about the North Korea. Everybody understand that it is about China as well. But at this point, in order to move forward, we are temporarily halting the exercise, and of course, there may be not from our side, but from the American side, actually, the President Trump mentioned that in his at the press conference, maybe we have to reduce some number of the size of scale of the U.S. forces in the Korean Peninsula. That may come up from the American president, not from the Korean side, I believe. The reason I'm saying this is not just because of government intention, but also the public, South Korean public, have a really good and a strong faith in the presence and the necessity of the U.S. military force in the Korean Peninsula. So I can say that at this point. Opcon transfer, of course, it is the election promise of the President Moon. Well, there's a kind of the when is the deadline, the timeline is kind of moving up and down. The Minister of Defense and also the BH is discussing the more specific timeline, but he promised that he's going to complete within his term. And then about China, well, that is a really tough topic, I think. And about the polling numbers, the United States, it is only the Americans living in the United States. This is done by the CNN. So I understand that it is not entirely reliable because not everybody has enough information and the knowledge about the security issues. But this is the kind of people's sentiment toward the government and the direction of the diplomatic policies, the diplomacy of the United States. So I wouldn't say that they know the specifics, that they are accurate, but this is the public sentiment toward what is going on right now between the United States and North Korea. One thing I would like to make sure is President Moon is enjoying approval ratings over the 75 and 80%, which is a remarkable number. And one another important thing is we had a local election last week. It's just not a local election, but it had by-elections. And out of 12 vacant National Assembly seats, the MPK, the ruling party of the President Moon, took 11 seats. With all those similar the parties, like the Justice Party, all those liberal parties, and the Democratic Peace parties, is over a majority of the National Assembly, which means that if there's anything that we have to go through the National Assembly relating to the security issues, then President Moon has a really, really strong backup. So I'll stop here, and then if there's anything that I can...
We have almost come to the conclusion of the session.